Here is the second half of the North Carolina debate on the enumeration of federal powers. This is the second of a three-part video.
If Congress should make a law beyond the powers and the spirit of the Constitution, should we not say to Congress, you have no authority to make this law? There are limits beyond which you cannot go. You cannot exceed the power prescribed by the Constitution. You are amenable to us for your conduct. This act is unconstitutional. We will disregard it.
McLean here is pointing out that if Congress goes beyond their legitimate authorities, the people will ignore them and then punish the members that voted for that.
Those rights which are unalienable are not alienated. They still remain with the great body of the people. When it is evident that the exercise of any power not given up would be a usurpation, it would be not only useless, but dangerous, to enumerate a number of rights which are not intended to be given up, because it would be implying, in the strongest manner, that every right not included in the exception might be impaired by the government without usurpation, and it would be impossible to enumerate.
Here we see an advocate of ratification explaining that a Bill of Rights could be dangerous because you may not be able to enumerate every right retained by a Bill of Rights, and the consequence would be that the federal government would say, well, this federal law does not violate that right from the Bill of Rights because the listing was imperfect, and therefore this federal law is constitutional. So Iredell is explaining why a Bill of Rights might be a problem.
If the Congress should claim any power not given them, it would be as bare usurpation as making a king in America. If this Constitution be adopted, it must be presumed the instrument will be in the hands of every man in America, to see whether authority be usurped. And any person by inspecting it may see if the power claimed be enumerated. If it be not, he will know it to be a usurpation.
Any attempt by Congress to exercise a power not expressly delegated would be as bad and as obvious a usurpation as making a king.
Having enumerated what we give up, it follows, of course, that whatever is done, by virtue of that authority, is legal without any new authority or power. The question, then, under this clause, will always be whether Congress has exceeded its authority. If it has not exceeded it, we must obey, otherwise not. When they pass an act, if it be in the execution of a power given by the Constitution, it shall be binding on the people, otherwise not.
If the federal government violates the Constitution, Iredell does not just anticipate resistance, he's relying on it to keep the federal government in bounds.
It, the Constitution, is not the supreme law in the exercise of a power not granted. It can be supreme only in cases consistent with the powers specially granted, and not in usurpations. If you grant any power to the federal government, the laws made in pursuance of that power must be supreme and uncontrolled in their operation. The only rational inquiry is whether those powers are necessary and whether they are properly granted.
The Constitution says that the federal government is only supreme within the powers delegated to it. When it goes beyond those and usurps a power not granted, it is not supreme.
Every law consistent with the Constitution will have been made in pursuance of the powers granted by it. Every usurpation or law repugnant to it cannot have been made in pursuance of its powers. The latter will be nugatory and void.
Here, Governor Johnson is reminding the skeptics that anytime the federal government passes a law that is a usurpation or in violation of the Constitution, it's void, has no meaning.
As to the subject of religion, I thought what had been said would fully satisfy that gentleman and every other. No power is given to the general government to interfere with it at all. Any act of Congress on this subject would be a usurpation. The gentleman supposes that the liberty of the press is not secured. The Constitution does not take it away. It says nothing of it, and can do nothing to injure it. Complaining, therefore,
Another advocate saying that because the federal constitution delegates to the federal government no power over religion or the freedom of the press, then it is unconstitutional and indeed inconceivable that the federal government would attempt to injure those.
The powers of the government are particularly enumerated and defined. They can claim no others, but such as are so enumerated. In my opinion, they are excluded as much from the exercise of any other authority as they could be by the strongest negative clause that could be framed.
Once again, Iredell is assuring his skeptical compatriots that the powers of the federal government are defined, and the limits are as effective at keeping the federal government within bounds as they would be if they had framed the strongest negative clause they could. It's already there. It's in the document as it was on the table in July of 1788.
Each state in the Union shall respectively retain every power, jurisdiction, and right, which is not by this Constitution delegated to the Congress. Those clauses which declare that Congress shall not exercise certain powers be not interpreted in any manner whatsoever to extend the power of Congress, but that they be construed either as making exceptions to the specified powers where this shall be the case, or otherwise as inserted merely for greater caution.
North Carolina, as it was about to ratify the Constitution, recommended a couple of amendments. One plainly says that North Carolina had declared that the people retain every power not delegated, and the other was just because there are certain restrictions on federal power listed in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution, that does not mean that the federal government has other powers that have not been enumerated and delegated. In other words, the federal government, despite the fact that there are some additional restrictions in Article 1, Section 9, the federal government only has those powers that are expressly delegated to it in the Constitution. In July of 1788, North Carolina voted neither to ratify nor reject the Constitution. The convention then adjourned. In November 1789, in other words, after the new Constitution had been at work for 6 months and a Bill of Rights had been proposed and was in the process of being adopted, the people of North Carolina held another session and ratified the Constitution. As with the other later states in the process, advocates of ratification in North Carolina assured the skeptics that the federal government would only be allowed to exercise those powers that are expressly delegated to it, and therefore this Constitution was safe to ratify. The limitations were a key element of gaining ratification in North Carolina.